Alright boys, welcome back to another video. Thunder Alley here. Today we're going to be discussing some big time players for the Chargers in their week 1 win over the Raiders. Starting off with J.K. Dobbins, who totaled 135 rushing yards on just 10 carries. He had runs of 46 and 61 yards. Dobbins averaged 13.5 yards per carry, the most by any running back in a season opener in NFL history, and his 135 rushing yards is the most by any player in his first game with the Chargers. Dobbins made highlight plays out of nothing. If you look at his fourth quarter run for 61 yards, he was only expected to have 2 yards on that play, and during his 46 yards, he was expected to gain 6. So you can see Dobbins is still that guy that he was with the Ravens pre-injury, but now he's just doing it with the Chargers. Hopefully he can stay healthy because Dobbins is one of the more electric players in football, but injuries have plagued him. He played in just 24 of a potential 74 games with the Ravens. He played in just 1 game last season with Baltimore after suffering a torn Achilles. But center Bradley Bozeman, who played with Dobbins in Baltimore, said after the game that he still got it and he never had a doubt about it. I mean, this is a big time addition for the Chargers, a team that last season could not run the ball. But even more important is they would give up on running the ball when it wouldn't work. The Chargers couldn't run the ball in the first half of this game, but in the second half, they continued to do it, and it paid off in a big way. If the Chargers had decided to just air it out early on, they probably lose this game. You have to give a lot of credit to Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman for continuing to run the football, because that's going to be a big thing for the Chargers this year, is dominating up front and winning the line of scrimmage. In terms of my second player on this list, I'm going with Joe Alt. It was his first NFL game, and Alt drew one of the toughest matchups in all of football with edge rusher Max Crosby. In 11 total pass rush snaps where Alt was left on an island against Crosby, he allowed 0 pressures. This was the first time Crosby failed to record a pressure against any one-on-one matchup in a game since week 9 of the 2022 season. I mean, that was a season and a half ago, guys. And Alt also saw 8 pass blocking snaps against Christian Wilkins and allowed 0 pressures. And it's even more awesome for him to have done that, considering he had to switch positions when being drafted to the Chargers. Alt went from left tackle to right tackle, of course, because Rashawn Slater had been playing left tackle, and he was one of the best in football at doing that. And you have to also realize that, well, Alt was the 5th pick in the draft, which means that the Chargers passed on Malik Neighbors, and a lot of people were surprised by that. And although, yeah, Neighbors looks good, but Joe Alt playing the offensive line, that's what the Chargers want to do. They don't need a flashy number 1 receiver to be able to win games, because they like what they have in Ladd McConkey, they like what they have in Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson. They might not love it, but we did see that they want to run the football. They want to win up front, and they want to keep the ball out of Herbert's hands as much as possible, because they understand that, hey, yeah, Justin Herbert's got a big arm. He's one of the most talented quarterbacks, not only in the NFL right now, but in NFL history. With the Chargers, they put too much weight on Herbert's shoulders in the past, and that's a large reason why they haven't won anything. Of course, a lot of that is the defense, the lack of run game, the poor coaching. But Herbert, he's not Superman, right? He can't do everything on his own. No quarterback in NFL history has been able to do it all on their own. Not Mahomes, not Josh Allen, not Lamar Jackson. So for the Chargers, they wanted to make it as easy as possible for Herbert. He was only sacked once in week 1. They ran the ball. They dominated defensively. They were the more physical team. And I have seen a lot of people in the comments be making fun of the Chargers, saying that, oh, well, you guys beat the Raiders. Who cares? The Raiders last season were pretty good. I mean, they had one of the best defenses. They were the last team in the NFL to beat the Chiefs. Still to this day, the last team to beat the Chiefs was the Las Vegas Raiders, and they did it with their defense and their physicality. So for the Chargers to beat the Raiders in week 1, that was a big thing for them moving forward. It's only going to increase their confidence, and I absolutely love that for them. Number 3 on my list is going to be Ladd McConkey, of course, the 2nd round rookie. He stepped up big for Herbert. He caught 5 of his 7 targets for 39 yards, including a 10-yard touchdown late in the 4th quarter that essentially ended the game. I wouldn't be surprised if McConkey becomes Justin Herbert's go-to target moving forward over Joshua Palmer. I mean, Quentin Johnson was okay in this game. He had a couple of catches. He did have a drop. I still have faith in Johnston, but it's looking like McConkey is going to be that dude for the Chargers, especially when they face different teams and they have to air it out more, I think McConkey is going to be that target that Herbert's looking for very often. Poona Ford is next up. I mean, I could have put Poona Ford #1 on this and nobody would have complained. I mean, he was a cheap acquisition this offseason for the Chargers, and the 7th-year veteran played a massive role in holding the Raiders to just 71 rushing yards. Not to mention, Ford sealed the game with an interception late in the game. I mean, that was big time. He ended up being the second best player on the team with an 89.2 grade according to Pro Football Focus. The only player ahead of him was Nick Bosa, who I'm about to get into, and the player behind him was Khalil Mack. So when you're between Bosa and Mack in terms of how you played, you know you're doing something right. I mean, the interior for the Chargers deserves a lot of credit. I mean, the game ball could go to that entire unit. That's how good they were. And the Raiders, they were trying to run the ball, and they just had no answer for it. And that's a huge reason why the Chargers were able to win this game. And then in terms of Bosa and Mack, I mean, both of these guys were just all over the place. They combined for 2.5 sacks. We saw Bosa, of course, force a takeaway that was recovered by Mack. When these two guys are healthy and on the field, I think the Chargers can beat anyone. That's how good they are. And, of course, with the addition of the interior and guys taking a leap, I mean, a new scheme, of course, on defense. I mean, the Chargers, like, you've got to be feeling great about them. This was a big-time confidence boost for them. And I would say next up on my list would be, I mean, I would probably put Jesse Minter, of course, the defensive coordinator. I mean, yeah, I guess you can't really put a coach on this because it is players, but I'm going to do it anyway just because the Chargers, they ended up forcing 3 turnovers. They had 4 sacks, and they limited the Raiders to just 3.2 yards per carry. The defense was absolutely locked in, and when the offense was struggling in the first half, the Chargers, they kept them in the game. And just to see a defense for the Chargers play this well, I mean, it's unheard of. Especially since I've been covering the Chargers the past couple of years. They've been one of the worst defenses in football under Brandon Staley, and clearly that's changed. And I will say one more player who deserves a lot of recognition, and that's going to be Cameron Dicker. He made all 3 field goal attempts with a long of 53 yards. And in my next video, I am going to get into specifically the stats from this game a little bit more in depth. But just to give you guys a sneak peek of that, we're going to talk about the Chargers and how, well, they ended up rushing for 176 yards, which puts them 5th in the league through week 1. They allowed just 1 sack, which is tied for 1st. They didn't turn the ball over, which ties them for 1st. In terms of their defense, they gave up 10 points, which puts them 2nd. Passing defense, this is kind of crazy. They gave up 225 yards. That puts them at 25th. The reason for that is teams were just not throwing the ball well in week 1, so it kind of makes the Chargers look really bad, but I didn't think the Raiders did that much through the air. It wasn't anything that hurt the team. I mean, they only had 1 snap in the red zone, guys. In terms of the rushing defense, 71 yards given up, 4th. Total defense, 296, 15th. Middle of the pack, basically, which is very good for the Chargers. 3rd down conversions, 35.71%. 16th, of course, we're talking about defense. Red zone defense 1st. In terms of sacks, 4. That puts them at 5th. Takeaways, 3, puts them tied for 1st. So, I mean, this was a great game for the Chargers. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. The first half, we can't just ignore that. But I'm very, very pleased with the Chargers, especially considering 2 things. 1, they're going to get better every single week. And 2, they play the worst team in football next week. Well, this week now, in the Carolina Panthers. So, I mean, if the Chargers win that game convincingly, I'm going to be feeling great because the old Chargers team, like, they would have probably had a close game with the Panthers, maybe even lost. So,